Good evening. My name's Tony Lane and I welcome you all here to this event. There's over 250 people that are registered, and thank you all for your engagement and your interest. But first I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am, the Bangarang people. That's near Wangaratta, and I also pay my respects and recognise the traditional owners on the land where you are all from. I also recognise and respect elders, past and present, and particularly welcome any First Nations people who are with us here tonight. So I'll just start with introducing our key speakers for the night, our key guests. Kim Rubenstein, firstly, has made an enormous contribution in the areas of education, law, and the community. And she's joining us here tonight in what we hope will be her next step in public life by representing the people of the ACT in the Australian Senate. Susan Benedyka is very well known in this part of the world in northeast Victoria, and for many years has run a really successful business in regional development and assisting all sorts of organisations, health services and different other groups be the very best that they can in what they're trying to achieve. She played a really instrumental role in the formation of Voices for Indi, and she also had brought with it a really strong focus on values and ethics. And Voices for Indi is still benefiting from that start today. Jane Caro needs no introduction. If you're like me, we all pause and pay attention when she bobs up on our TV screen ready to make a comment. She's been a really strong advocate on many important issues, a well-known feminist, and the strongest of supporters on public education, and also recognised along the way with an Order of Australia. We're going to be in the hands of these marvellous ladies for an hour. The last 15 or 20 minutes will be for questions. So in that, we're going to use the Q&A function. So use that throughout, and we'll get to that later on and moderate some questions. And any that we can't get to will be dealt with over the next day or two by Kim and Susan, because all your questions are valuable and they all should be responded to. Look, we've also got the chat function enabled. So that's a really important thing. We won't be referring to the chat function tonight, but we really want to attract all of your comments and good ideas that you pick up tonight. And Kim and Susan will be paying great attention to that over the next day or two to see what else they can take on board from all you very wise people that are attending here this evening. So with that many on board, there should be a whole lot of learnings available to both Kim and Susan. So I'll hand over now. So in a year that started with Grace Tame as the Australian of the Year, right through to the rubbish served up in recent hours in a policy that's supposed to represent something on climate change, I'm not quite sure where Jane might take us, but it's over to you for the conversation with Kim and Susan. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Tony. I'm not sure quite where Kim and Susan will take us, and I think that'll be very interesting to see. But yes, you're right, this is a most peculiar year, and not just because of COVID, which of course is peculiar on top of peculiar. Hence we're meeting in this rather, well, at once wonderful way of doing it, because we can actually get together a lot cheaper without harming the climate. You know, it's great in many ways. Imagine what it would be like to have a pandemic without it. But at the same time, there's always limitations. So I am delighted to be moderating this conversation with Susan and Kim, because I'm also delighted to see so many women, you know, putting their hand up and wanting to be part of our political power, not simply, you know, on the sidelines or feeling strongly and furious and not actually getting in there and grasping the power with both their hands. And I love to see that. So I'm just going to start with the really obvious question to both of you, and perhaps I'll ask you, Kim, first. Why did you decide to run? And also, if you wouldn't mind thinking at the same time about that, why you? So there's the personal reason, what I want to do, but there's also the external thing. Why are you the right person to stand as an independent for the Senate for ACT at the next election?
Thanks, Jane, and thank you to Tony and to Susan as well for organising tonight. And I do want to begin by just looking out and grounding myself in country and recognising the traditional owners of the land that I'm sitting on, the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Really important questions, obviously, for me to be sitting here for the new experience for me as a political candidate, as opposed to the life that I've led for the last 25 years as a legal academic and lawyer, doing a lot of work in the areas of citizenship, of questions to do with the regulation of government power. And I think the answers to your questions are combined, Jane, in the sense that the last 25 years of my life experience in that public space has really impressed upon me the urgency of these issues in the here and the now. So what I have been enthused by as an educator in terms of sharing ideas with my students over the last 25 years, what I've been passionate about in terms of my writing about law and my scholarship in areas to do with citizenship and our constitution and gender, and in my public policy contributions as, you know, writing op-eds and being in the public space, I've realised that that is all very important. But unless the people in Parliament are prepared to listen and to engage with those issues, nothing will happen. So I really feel that we are at a moment where the time is right for me to bring that material, bring that experience, bring that expertise, and bring that perspective directly into Parliament. And the most direct way to do that is to do that as an independent, authentic to the independent stance I've been taking over the last 25 years, and to engage, continue to that engagement that I've been having with people here in Canberra in a direct way as an active citizen, this time as a representative, as opposed to the active citizenry that I've been showing in those other ways over the last 25 years.
It's really an interesting way of putting it, the idea of an active citizen actually entering the Parliament, because I think sometimes we almost artificially divide, don't we?
Exactly.
Our politicians from our citizens.
Yes.
And that strikes me as the opposite of what democracy is supposed to be about. So
Exactly.
a really interesting way you put that. Susan, what about you? What's made you think I'm going and I'm going now, and I think it should be me because?
I started, the bushfires 2019 and 2020 were horrific. They were horrific around this area as they were throughout Australia. And it was a preventable, forecastable event. It was something that the fire chiefs tried to meet with our Prime Minister and tell him about, and the meeting did not occur. The preparation wasn't there, and we ended up being shocked by this profound disaster. That really got me going. I was so upset about all of that. So I actually sat with a friend, Kathy McGowan, having a coffee very early in January last year, saying, I don't know if it's even possible if an independent can get up into the Senate, but let me explore. I'm going to give myself a year to explore. So I did that last year. And we have worked out that there is a way and it is possible. I've always taught people that they have to be the change they want to see. If you actually want to be that engaged, active citizen, you've got to put your hand up and do something about it. And for me, like Kim, we're bringing a lifetime of our career, our experience. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother. There's a whole lot that we bring with us, not as career politicians, but as people who've made a difference in the civilian world, being able to say, I want to be able to bring that level of insight, oversight and foresight to the work of being a senator.
Fantastic. And yet, I don't know about you, but I watched that program, I suppose it was a month or two ago, Misrepresented, which showed the kind of appalling treatment that so many women who, prior to you, on all sides of the political spectrum, you know, grasped the nettle, decided to become active citizens in the strongest possible sense of the word in terms of standing for public office, and have been horribly mistreated as a result of that. Did it take some courage? Did you have to actually think to yourselves, you know, can I put up with the kind of treatment that I don't think anyone expects to get in the business or professional or academic world anymore. It seems reserved for our parliamentarians, which is shocking in itself. Susan, you go first this time.
It's quite shocking, actually. The fact that we're going back into almost the 80s in the way of behaviour and a power structure that is unbelievable and disenfranchises women in particular, but anyone who's not like the old school type person who's a male, who tends to be in their 40s to 50s and upwards. I'm just appalled, and I feel like in some ways, we were I was a feminist of the 70s. In the 80s, was doing lots of management and leadership training for myself, and then moving into those senior positions in the 90s. And as chair of boards, you can actually control and manage the behaviour around the boards, and then make sure that we're all being really respectful. If you even go to question time, the disrespect on show for every year 5 student in Australia who goes in to watch that question time, we're saying this is the way you behave in politics. It is not the way to behave. We've got standards that we can bring. There's, I think, having gone through the bruising of probably the 80s, as many other women did in management, it was to come out the other side and say, we do not have to be like that. We can hold a level of respect, a level of accountability, still have robust debates, and get to a point where we can make good decisions without all of this nonsense that's going on as well.
Kim, what about you?
Yes, look, I think it is a very sobering environment that we are putting our hands up in. And I think in addition to misrepresented, of course, there was the strong female lead film that we've all seen, which is harrowing. And I think, though, that for me, at this point in my life, it sends that sort of message that if people like us are not prepared to put up our hands and have a go at changing things, then things just will continue. And I do think that there is something about a force of individuals who are saying this is not acceptable, and we're prepared to go in to be agents of change, is also reinforcing for other people to think and be inspired by the fact that it is possible. It is up for us, to all of us, to demand change. And I think, picking up from Susan's point as well, the way we do that, because part of, I think, the reason why this has become amplified is the intense polarisation of our political system over the last period. And this might be something we come back to as running as independents as opposed to the party system. But I think that the party structures have amplified this intensely personal, polarised approach to policy making. And I think we are at a point where people in the community generally are saying that is not good enough. We're dissatisfied with this approach to politics, and that there is such an appetite for people like us saying we need to engage differently. We have to actually engage with the ideas, not the person. And by doing that, and if we take it away from the person and we resist that attention to the very particular adversarial approach of Parliament to being a house of deliberation, of engagement with ideas, then that will have a flow-on effect to the ways in which we communicate with others beyond our Parliament. Parliament should really be the leader, and at the moment it's the lowest common denominator, and we just have to change that.
Yeah. I think that'll resonate with a lot of people, both your messages about that. But it is interesting when you talk about the tribalism and the polarisation, which, anyone who goes on social media can see for themselves. And yet, when I look at our 2 major parties, it's not easy to differentiate them in many areas. Yes, the only difference seems to be who they're abusing and who they're being rude about. But actually, when you look down the line at their policies on refugees, even to some extent on climate, we're really talking about, well, with refugees, virtually no difference, but with climate, it's pretty narrow. If you think about the Upper Hunter by-election, the coal miner who was pre-selected by the Labor Party, Joel Fitzgibbon's position on that, we're talking about polarisation, which is personal, but not actually particularly political. Would you agree, Kim?
Yes, look, I think there has been this real sort of move towards which team you're on, Who are you with and who are you against? And I think that the party framework has amplified that, even though, as you said, in many areas there's very little difference. And the reason why often there is very little difference is because they appear to be driven by a desire to be in power rather than a desire to show leadership. And so it's this lowest common denominator approach of what is the best way to make sure we win, rather than what is it that we are going to do to help this nation move forward. And I think that again is one of the positive disruptive forces of independence in the most recent period of our politics, and the tribute that we can pay to you, Susan, in being part of that Indi campaign, and that tribute to that move throughout the country of recognising that to enhance our democracy, independent voices, whether it be in the lower house or now what we're seeking to advocate in the upper house as independents running to represent policy change, not a particular group that you're aligned with, that is what is needed to actually develop better policy and then see more of a differential and to be able to provide the differences within the parties that I think are there but haven't been allowed out because of that fear of what that might mean for the likelihood of winning. I think our independent voices will actually strengthen the parties to better differentiate their policies. We're a value add not only for the House itself, but will be a value add to the parties to make the parties better than what they are at the moment.
That's a really interesting idea, isn't it, Susan, that you by going in and having your eyes on what do I believe is the best thing for this country rather than what's going to advance the Liberal Party agenda, what's going to advance the Labor Party agenda, what's going to convert the, isn't it 10 seats that basically decide government, and so they poll those people till they must be blue in the face, and that's who they appeal to, and so they both, that's one of the reasons why you get this same thing, because they're all appealing to whatever the focus groups have told them about the voters in those seats. So in a way, independents are going in to smash that up.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's three things I really wanted to pick up from what Kim said and just from what you said there. First one is long-term vision. What is the country we are trying to create? What is it we're looking for? And then what actions are we taking today in order to create that country? If we do it in business all the time. I work with people on 10-year, 20-year, and even 50-year visions in their business or in their region, a whole range of places. And yet I don't hear that being spoken about. The second one was that desire to hang on to power. And it's truly binding and crippling because it doesn't allow people to make the decisions that have got to be made. If they are ruled by focus groups, exactly as you said, that's not deep listening. It's momentary thought bubbles. It's not an engaged conversation. It doesn't take us to the future that we've really got to actually create. You know, the Chief Seattle, just to go back to American history, actually said we need to be thinking about 7 generations ahead. It's been part of our Indigenous cultures to think long term. Not about now, and certainly not about holding on to power for another 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. It's quite ridiculous. And then the third point I wanted to make was about the way in which the Senate works, and that's what really attracts me to it. It's collaborative. You actually have to get together through crossbench inquiries and listen deeply, hear what's happening. People of all sorts can make a submission to the Senate. They can be ordinary citizens with an idea or something that they really need to talk about, or their experience that they want to share. And at the same time, experts are called as witnesses to those same inquiries, and then reports put together. It's quite inclusive because you actually get to hear a whole range of voices to help make that decision making. And it's actually the bit and the function that holds the rest of Parliament to account. We're watching Senate estimates going on at the moment, and many a time it's through Senate estimates that we discover something we had no idea about. So those 3 functions of the Senate are the things that most attract me, and I think that by coming in as independents, you really do help people understand, what am I here in politics for? People actually right across the spectrum want to represent or be useful or make a difference because they're in political life. They come from different places to do that. But no one goes in to say, I'm going in to bash my head against a brick wall. They're saying, I'm going in to make a difference. But what is that difference? How do you uncover it? How do you discover what they've got and what's of value that can shape that future for us?
Yeah, it's interesting points that you make, and it strikes me as both of you talk that you are actually, in a way, wanting to urge our leaders to actually lead, because what I have felt for some time is that neoliberalism as a philosophy, which both parties have really bought into to some extent, is actually opposed to government. So we keep electing people to run our government who don't really believe in governments, which may be one of the reasons why you get this rampant short-termism, that quite often they're acting as a blocker to government action, to any kind of action. They're actually not looking to move things forward. They're actually looking to stop anything changing. That's certainly my impression of the current government. Kim, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that it highlights something that flows from Susan's earlier point as well, Jane, and that is that link between engaging with your electorate or with the jurisdiction you're representing and leading at the same time. And I think it's a real fine balance in our democratic framework, because what I'm saying and what's motivated me is that I truly want to engage with the people of the Australian Capital Territory. I want to be a true representative for them, in the sense that up until now, with only 2 senators in the ACT and up until now being 1 Labor and 1 Liberal senator, that each of those representatives have had to convince their parties for anything that is in the best interest of the ACT. And that's another whole story in itself. But in order to properly engage with our communities, we also recognise that we're not going to be able to satisfy everyone on every single policy issue. And so that's where leadership is important. And I think what we're trying to model here is a framework where we engage with our communities and we truly listen to those diversity of opinions, and where we can directly speak to the people whose opinion we may not be proposing or forwarding at that particular issue, and give them full feedback and say, we're listening to you. I want to be able to be in a position where there are times where I'm going to disagree in principle with what someone's advocating, but say, I want to listen to what is motivating you for your position. I want to then share with you why I think in this scenario I'm going to be leading differently, but I want you to trust that you know that I will come back and listen to you on the next issue, and I'm not going to treat you as other, and I'm not going to ignore you just because I disagree with you on this issue. I'm going to continue to engage with the community. And I think it's that sort of disjuncture that we've got at the moment between leadership and following what the focus groups say. It's about recognising that there can be a diversity of opinions, but it's how we engage with those opinions and treat our fellow community members as true human beings who need to be engaged with.
Yeah. And Susan, you started by talking about the 2019 bushfires, and that really made you, was the motivating factor for thinking, okay, somebody's got to do something. Oh, where's the somebody? Oh, I guess there's one sitting right here. It could be me that does something. And I love that kind of motivation. It comes from, well, somebody needs to do it, I'm going to do it. But do you think, we're watching the rise, aren't we, of independents, particularly standing in House of Reps seats, particularly in Liberal held seats, which the Liberal Party seem to think is the sort of Labor plant and a conspiracy, which is going back to that old polarisation. And, it's all about them. It's a kind of ego-driven idea that these people couldn't possibly have arisen organically. They have to be being puppet mastered by their enemies. But my reading of this rise, and a lot of it's driven by women, is in fact a sense of urgency about action on climate change, and a kind of hopelessness about our either party's ability to actually take action and to lead. Is that part of what you're hoping to do yourselves, but also, as you said, Susan, drive, and you as well, Kim said, drive the current politicians, the current parties, to actually move to a more proactive rather than defensive stance on this issue and many others. Susan, what do you think?
Oh, I can't agree more, Jane. It's exactly what motivates me. Like the two really good pieces of legislation at the moment that are not getting a chance to even be debated are being put up by independents. So Zali Steggall has extraordinary climate action bill. It's been well researched. It really has taken into account a whole range of issues, and she's negotiated quite widely. But because of the game playing, she can't even get it onto the floor to get debated. Helen Haynes has an Australian Federal Integrity Commission bill, which is rated by the Centre for Public Integrity and Transparency Australia as one of the best they've seen. Judges have come through and said to Helen in the consultation, this is really good, we need to see this up. She's had to resort to sending it back up to the Senate, and Senator Rex Patrick has put it before the Senate at the moment in order to get it debated. But they're two extraordinary pieces of legislation that we have needed, not just now, but 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And we've been fighting ideological wars and nowhere. So legislation's not getting put together that we really need to serve our future. And in the meantime, our earth is burning. Our ecosystems are really out of kilter. Things are going wrong for our generation, let alone those in the future. I don't feel really very good about passing that on. I feel like we've let people down, and we've got to go back in and tidy it up and make sure it's right. So we'll have a role in building legislation, but we'll also have a role in amplifying those great bits of legislation that are put up by whoever puts them up. And in this case, two lots of independents who have done extraordinary work, and then making sure that they get debated soundly in the Senate and that we get them through. That's really important.
Yeah. Well, Zali Steggall has also just put up, I think in the last couple of days, a Truth in Political Advertising bill, which seems to me outrageous, really, that we have a situation where our politicians, and this of course would include you, if you run political messages, you can lie through your teeth apparently and get away with it. I mean, I think that's astonishing to a lot of people that coming out of an advertising background, the kind of strictures on commercial advertising, that they have to tell the truth. They can Trade Practices Act polices it. Their competitors will get them in front of it if they don't back up their claims with evidence. It seems that the politicians can't bring themselves to actually make the reforms that are necessary for us to rediscover our trust in democracy. Kim, this is right up your street, this idea of the corroding of trust in democracy in our institutions.
Yes, absolutely. Look, this is something that I'm really committed to in terms of an independent commission against corruption, because what we've seen, not only over the last 18 months, but for a significant period, is the real reduction on the structures in our democratic system to protect against corruption. So we have a system of separation of powers, which is set up to protect against absolute power corrupting absolutely. But we also introduced in the 1970s and 1980s systems like freedom of information legislation, an administrative appeals tribunal, the ombudsman, all these structures which recognise that in between elections, you need to also have checks and balances on the exercises of those powers that we elect people to exercise on our behalf. But those systems, like freedom of information, like the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, have been undermined by various different actions, including political appointments to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, or the overburdening of the Ombudsman in terms of the jurisdictions. So that I think has led to a culture of entitlement. When you don't have those safeguards working properly, people who are exercising power are saying, or have the sense that they are beyond check. And so that is, and those things need changing in and of themselves. We need to revalue those structures, because that then becomes preventative in the sense that people understand those principles that should be guiding them when they exercise power on our behalves. And in addition, a separate independent commission will be almost like that final no point, going beyond the point of return, that extra need. And I just think that as a society, we're at a point where we need that action, and having people in the Senate who can not only be there to be another part of the structure of accountability and transparency, but being able to use these mechanisms together will just be such a strong enhancer of our democratic system.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, isn't it, Susan? I felt for a long time that, and I think it is because we, our two political parties have gotten enmeshed in a kind of struggle which is irrelevant to most people, and in fact, worse than that, downright irritating to the population. And they've lost sight of so many things, and they seem to have gained leverage, and they compete sometimes to see who can most effectively appeal to the worst parts of our nature, the worst parts of who we are. Whereas surely good leadership should play to the better angels of our nature. It should make us the best we can be, and we get a kind of pseudo-patriotism and nationalism in place of real decency and human values. Susan, speak to that. Is that a motivator for you too?
This is really right up my alley. So as Tony said, when we first started, the group of us, 12 of us, started Voices for Indi, we listened right throughout our electorate and had lots of kitchen table conversations. And what came out, we asked people, what did they want to see in a politician? They wanted respect. They wanted to be heard. They wanted a whole range of things that were absolutely contrary to what we're seeing now. And they go back to those better angels. We actually want to believe in and trust our politicians. In some ways, you could say quite cynically that bickering and the argy-bargy that goes on, and what we see in question time, and therefore what we see in the snippets of news, is enough to turn people off.
Yep.
And in turning people off, then they're not having to be held accountable. I think we've got to go the other way around. And I've certainly set up my own pledge about what I believe is the standards of behaviour I'll hold myself to, and I expect other people to hold me to that. Simon Longstaff from the Sydney Ethics Centre set up a fantastic politician's pledge. I've also signed that. I just think we go back to who we are at our very core, and that's our decency, our real reason, our ability to listen and collaborate with each other. We're social beings. We need to work together in order to achieve the very best we can achieve. And it does not serve us by going to this lowest common denominator. We've got to lift it right up out of that mire.
Yeah, well, a couple of things I can think of, Kim, that struck me as particularly indecent was giving 3 of the 4 members of the Biloela family bridging visas, but the 4-year-old girl was the one who didn't get it. Now, just the indecency of that is quite...
Look, for many years now, in terms of the keeping my legal advocate hat on, I've been doing a lot of pro bono work in this area, Jane. And what I think that represents is this strong move towards exclusion over inclusion.
Yes.
Our whole society, in a way, constitutionally, has a very difficult start, because it was the White Australia policy that motivated the various framers to actually form the nation of Australia. But beyond that time, we've had positive changes in our immigration policy. And we had a period where we're at now a position in society where 49% of Australians have a parent or themselves were born outside of Australia. We are a richly enhanced society from that multicultural experience. But we're still caught, or the government, and as you said earlier, in a bipartisan, unhealthy way, still caught in this notion of exclusion over inclusion. We need to reorient our society to be accepting of the other. Of course, we have to regulate in the broader public interest, but that does not mean that we have to be mean-spirited in the way that we treat our fellow human beings or newcomers to our country. And I just thought the other thought that I had that links it back to your earlier question, Jane, in terms of leadership of our better selves, I think we should be all inspired by the Uluru Statement from the Heart, because that is leadership from our Indigenous community. It was active citizenship in its fullest sense. The Indigenous women elders largely went around to all of the different communities around the country and said to the communities, what do you want from your constitution? That's something that we should all be asking of ourselves. And then not only did they ask that, but then they wrote this most beautiful statement, imbued with legal concepts, some international law in there, and the reaching out to all Australians to join in that journey. I just think that that inspiration is something that is true leadership, and leadership that I certainly am committed to in the Senate, seeking to bring up the best in both parties to ensure that we move towards constitutional change to affirm a voice to Parliament. And I feel that that would be a form of healing, not only for our constitution, but for us as a nation, and then would also enable us to move forward with some other constitutional change that I think we need to make as well.
Well, certainly we need to make some serious changes. Do you get a sense, Susan and Kim, as you go around, you know, getting your campaigns underway, talking to people, listening to people, that there is a hunger for change, that there is a hunger out there for that while we are afraid, and I think we're not stupid to be afraid, I think humanity is at a very difficult and dangerous point in our history, but that by playing on the fear in such a negative way, as we see our current politicians do, that even though we might go along with it superficially, it leaves a nasty taste in our mouth about who we are, and it's harder and harder to feel proud of Australia. So how do you overcome the leveraging of fear and exclusion, which I think Kim is dead right about? How do we actually, because they're powerful forces, how do you move to a more hopeful position? I mean, Obama did it with Yes We Can, but of course, the whole time he was doing it, I was worried for him, because I thought he's built up such expectations as to what he can do. He can only disappoint, which is the problem with hope as a, idea. How are you going to get around that, Susan? How are you going to?
Let me take this one on. Again, when we were training our volunteers and giving them an idea about why they were, helping unpack for them, why were they involved and why did they feel hopeful? This was back in the first campaign in 2013. I came across a model by Marshall Gantz, who talks about organising and leadership and how you bring people together. And it was really helpful to help people understand their own personal journey. What was it that took them from apathy to anger? What was that switch? What was that moment, or what was the series of events? But then what is it that takes them from fear to hope? Or what would they like to take them from fear to hope? If you could articulate that fear, what's the opposite of that? What is that hope? What does it look like? And then from inertia, just things moving along in their own right, to actually moving to urgency and saying, no more. This is time. We've got to do something about that. He helps frame people as well from their no, we can't to yes, we can. And you can hear the Obama speeches in here. And then from, I'm not the only one that thinks like this. If I look around me, I can see solidarity. That model is called the A. Hughes model. So thinking about converting your anger to hope with some urgency. Yes, we can. And I'm not alone doing this by myself. I can do it with others. And when I'm speaking to people now, they're even more hungry than they were in 2013. And now, because of Indi and because of other places, we can see that it is actually possible and we can make it a reality.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm aware that time is rushing past. I don't want to stop you.
Can I just add, add one thing there, which is that I just think we are at a very particular moment, an unprecedented moment. The last 18 months with the experience of the nation under COVID has just impressed upon every human being the power of government over our lives. And I have been so affirmed in this step of announcing that I want to run for the Senate. And I've taken that strategic choice of forming a party to be above the line. And in order to do that, I initially needed 500 members, and then that was up to 1,500 members. When I started, it was still 500 members, and people said to me, it's going to be very hard to get those members. I had 500 members within a week, people who had never, ever joined a party. And then within another 4 weeks, another 1,000. So I'm now being processed. But that to me is reflective of the appetite for people wanting this to happen. And I have then since been meeting, you know, most nights on Zoom, in Zoom around the kitchen tables for an hour with groups of people at a time. And there is just such an appetite for this. And so, and that energy then just grows within the community now that we are able to go out and we can speak to people and so forth. I just think that that energy is going to amplify, and that we all need to be energized by that moment, that this is possible. You know, in my scenario, Kim can win. That idea that it is really possible, and we've got to just ensure that the energy is towards that possibility and to take people out of the apathy. But I think they've been taken out of it by virtue of the fact that they've lived through the experience in such a profound way that enough is enough. We have to do something about it.
And you're talking about a healthy kind of anger, where people get to the point of, no, sod it, I'm going to get out there and change this, because it's, I often think human beings only change when it gets too uncomfortable to stay the same. And maybe we're just getting to that level of discomfort now. We've left it a little bit late. Nevertheless, let me ask you some of the questions that have come in. I'll just go through them, or I'm going to have to put my glasses on because I can't read it in the type. Okay, the first one, collaboration. The topic is collaboration as women in Parliament. If elected, it's a very interesting question. If elected, would you be interested in establishing a cross-party women's caucus, as parliaments in many other countries have, given that we so often see the issues that are really important to women dismissed as kind of not trivial, not really interesting, 51% of the population who cares about them. And that does seem to be the way we're treated, even with this current summit on women's safety and child sex abuse, where we're not asking Brittany Higgins, we're not asking Grace Tame, we're trying to keep it controlled so that nothing comes out of it that the government doesn't like. Well, do you think this would be a good idea?
Absolutely.
That just say exactly the same as you, Kim. For me, well, I'll give you an example. I'm doing the University of Melbourne Pathways to Politics for Women program. It's funded by the Trawala Foundation and very generously supported by Carol Schwartz. In that cohort of 31, there are people right across the political spectrum. The respect we have for each other, we come from very different views, we'll have a different pathway in order to get into politics, but high amount of respect, a real understanding of the life journey of women, young through to people of my age, and what that actually means. And then what we bring as part of good debate to the House or to the Senate to be able to sort out ridiculous anachronism, as well as the way in which we've been treated. So I think that it's absolutely critical, and I can see and have seen really great cross-party relationships develop. And I know that when I've gone into the House, certainly representing my region a number of times, that door is open to have those conversations, no matter what the party. And that's something beholden on us as independents, to build great relationships. And then as women, I think we've got a responsibility to the younger women who I'd like to see in Parliament when it's cleaned up and a much better place to be.
Well, we saw it work really well in RU486 debate.
Yes, I was going to say that too, exactly. And it's about drawing on our life experiences, isn't it? And recognising that there are certain aspects of our life experience as women, and that will be diverse in itself because of the other things that influence us in our lives, but sharing that together as women, I think, is fundamental to moving forward in a collaborative way.
And I think women are almost trained to collaborate, whereas men are often trained to compete. I don't believe it's in hardwired. I think it's the way we are kind of socialised.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, this isn't a million miles away from what we've just been talking about. The topic is negotiation and compromise between senators. independents face the prospect of doing a lot of that negotiating and compromising. How will you do this differently? Is there a strategy that you've considered? Kim, first.
So I think it is about embedding that true engagement and listening to the other perspectives, drawing out what is it that's driving that particular perspective, and are there ways to both satisfy those particular needs at the same time as fulfilling other needs. So this is really about standing in the other person's shoes and trying to best engage with how you can find a way forward that takes into account those different needs. So I think that that is one aspect of it in terms of the modeling of behavior. And the other is just the respect within which one comes to the table to do that total respect for each of us, as Susan said earlier, of really being motivated with that true motivation for achieving the best policy outcome for the nation. If that is your driving force, then what it's not compromise for compromise's sake. It's about thinking through an outcome that might involve some notion of compromise on one level, but may be about true achievement towards the end goal, which must be what we're looking for.
So you're not trying to win, you're trying to get
that's right,
the best result. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
And it's not win-lose, it's how do we create the best outcome together? And there's two other strategies for me, ones that I use all the time with business. One is that long-term vision. What are we trying to get to? We might differ about the pathways, but what are we trying to get to?
Yeah.
And the other one is to set up a series of principles that say, what are our absolutes and what are our no-goes? Sometimes it's as important to know what you won't do as what you will do. So having, Kim mentioned framework before, or a set of principles, things that we absolutely agree on, and then how do we move from there in order to judge our outcomes? That's what we do in the real world. It should be exactly what we bring to Parliament, rather than an ideological battle that's about winning or losing and getting that moment of time on the news that night.
Or worse, being presented with what you think is a need to get to a certain result, and actually it's a hidden agenda. There's actually an agenda which might be look like we're doing something, but actually make sure we don't do something, which I think is almost always the agenda these days. Pardon my cynicism. Let me go to another question. Will the candidates explain, can you both explain the nitty-gritty of quotas, above the line voting, etc.? So this is the mechanics of how people vote for you and how you're going to actually get there.
Kim, you can start, and then
I was going to say, you might be the expert on this.
You can do the Canberra scene and I'll do the Victorian scene.
Yeah, so here in the ACT, there are 2 Senate seats. So the quota, when you work out a quota in any jurisdiction, it's the number of seats plus 1 divided by 100. So 100 divided by that number. So here it's 33 1/3% that I need to be able to get of votes to be one of the 2 senators. And in Senate voting, as the person has asked, there's both above the line and below the line voting. So the difference for independents in the Senate is quite significant compared to the House. So in the House, independents are on a level playing field with whoever they're against in terms of the ballot. But in the Senate, there's the above the line and the below the line voting, and only parties can be listed with their names above the line. So that's why I made the strategic decision to create a Kim for Canberra party as a vehicle to make sure that I'm on an even playing field above the line when an election is called. Now, I say that I've got my application in. It went in on the 1st of October, and the Electoral Commission takes a minimum of 12 weeks to process it. So I'm very much dependent on an election being called next year and that being processed in order to achieve that strategic objective of being above the line. If I'm not above the line, then as an independent, I'm below the line, and there is a framework where independents can be grouped below the line, and there is a box above the line, but it's not identified. There's nothing written above that. So it just makes it more difficult for people. And that's why it's been so difficult for independents to be elected in the Senate, because of that differentiation. So anyone who's really committed to voting for an independent when they're not above the line has to make the conscious decision of voting below the line and encouraging others to vote below the line. But each of us have to get that quota of votes in order to achieve that seat.
And Susan, you've taken the difficult road because you are a genuine independent for the Senate. So you are relying on below the line voting, I presume.
Or watch this space, and I'll just go through that in a moment. So there are, in a half Senate election in any state, they have 6 senators that they elect. So it's 14.3% of the vote is a quota. Exactly as Kim has said, above the line, you need to vote 1 to 6. Below the line, you need to vote 1 to 12 as the minimum vote. I'm one of the nerds who've always filled in every single box below the line. It's my choice. I want to make it go to the right people. For me, we're having very good discussions with Independent Voices for the Senate, a party that is being established to create a vehicle. It's deliberately party light. It has no policy committee. Whoever is selected from the state in order to be on that ticket runs the campaign and listens deeply to formulate their policy strategy. And I quite like that sort of look. So if people would like to look them up, Independent Voices for the Senate, again, the same process that Kim has articulated. They need to get their 1,500. They go through the AEC scrutiny in order to be up. And the same option exists for me. If that happens outside of the time band of when the election is called, it's finding another independent with a similar set of values and being there on the ballot paper and just saying to people, you need to number 1 to 6 above the line or 1 to 12 below the line. And the way in which the counts work, there are over 360 counts last time to finalise the 6th position for Victoria. Every single time that a pen goes through and says a number in my box actually counts. So it's really important to get out there and get that message known.
Good on you, Susan. I'm going to skip one question because I think we've sort of talked about it in the body of our conversation, and I'm aware of time flashing past. This is the topic is strategy for Kim and Susan. So Kim, what's your strategy to convince Liberal voters to vote for you?
Yes.
And for which is the arithmetic harder, Kim with a quota of 33% or Susan having to be known across a bigger state? And Susan's just talked a bit about its party status with the Independent Voices for the Senate. So we might skip that part of the question, but stick with those 2 bits if that's okay.
Sure.
I'll start. And in Victoria, so it's quite interesting that right across Australia, really, the Liberal and National Party group up together. So they've got 2 logos above the line and then they have 1 line of people.
Candidates, yeah.
It's really interesting about where the National Party sits, particularly in Victoria, and who are they representing. And the current debate is raising that question all the time. So people may, in fact, be a small L Liberal voter and want to vote for climate action and yet feel constrained by having to vote, along the party lines and just the number above the box. It's intentional voting that will make the difference, going in and being really clear about what you want to do. But it's not just the Liberal Party. This is not about just the Liberal and National Party or the coalition. It's right across the board that people are saying it is time we had difference. It's time we really knew what people stood for. And to go to your point before, it's very hard to articulate between the 2 major parties at the moment. And that's why already the polling is telling us that people are actively seeking alternative ways to vote.
Yeah.
So, yes, I would just reiterate that it's not only Liberal voters. I think we're looking at all dissatisfied individuals in terms of looking at their parties and who they've voted for in the past and whether they are really voicing the needs of those individuals, and having an independent who's very clear about the need for improving our system of democracy that people can trust, can look at our records and see our achievements in and of themselves, but also this commitment to engaging with our communities. And perhaps to a certain extent, Susan, I have a smaller territory to deal with because, of course, Canberra is the same size, the voters are the same as Tasmania. I should say we only get 2 senators to their 12, but the area for me to be able to truly engage with the whole electorate is manageable in a way that my constituents can really feel that by electing me as their senator, they will have a direct voice into Parliament. And I think that that is something that, as I said earlier, that there's this moment that people realise that that is really significant, and that that can then have an influence over the whole nation, because as Susan said earlier, it is almost impossible for whoever wins government to have a majority in the Senate, because it's a half Senate election, and we know that that is going to be extremely unlikely. And therefore, as an independent, we can have a real influence over the future of our democratic health.
Yeah. I think we've probably got time for one last question, and it's quite an interesting one. The topic is difference between independents and Australian Democrats. That's somebody we haven't heard from for a while. I have been searching, says the questioner, for a Senate alternative to the big parties, one that is values driven, big on integrity, focused on facts. I'm very tempted by the comeback of the Australian Democrats in this election. What do Susan and Kim think about this, and what is their main point of difference to that party?
So I would say that the principle of being an independent is that you are not fixed by a party structure. And it's not to say that I can't be collaborative, but it's saying that I want to be able to take these ideas and values directly into Parliament, rather than having to negotiate within a party to make sure that it is always consistent with the authenticity of what I'm bringing in to the Parliament. So there might be many similarities, and I haven't looked at the current platform of the Democrats, but it would be about where there are differences and where my energy would go into being able to advocate what it is that I think is so central at this point in time in this country.
And yet, Susan, I am reminded of the Australian Democrats' Don Chipp's famous line, "Keep the bastards honest." And it does sound a bit like our conversation has been pithily summed up by "keep the bastards honest."
I would agree with you entirely. There's quite a lot of that. And in fact, Senator Rex Patrick says his logo says "Sick'em Rex." That same notion of holding to account. It's, as I think through it, it's that, I just lost the plot a little bit just then, but it's really,
it's like, Susan,
it's the difference between an independent. I've looked at various parties and they were not for me. I've not been a member of a party, nor do I want to be a member of a party. And that's why this party-like notion of no control, and a party who can endorse a non-member and say, yep, we think you've got the goods, we think you're up for this. So for me, it's that absolute independence, as Kim is saying, being able to listen, being able to navigate, and being able to keep to core principles rather than compromising to those outside of the Parliament.
Now, the last question, we don't have time for it, but I'm just going to read it out loud so we can all think about it, because I think there's a really good point being made here. Is there a challenge that independents speak mainly to a middle-class audience? I think that's a really good question. How do you reach out to those that are over politics and parties but don't follow issues particularly closely? But we can't answer that because we don't have time. So nevertheless, I'll leave it with all of us, both those who are watching and also our 2 fabulous independent candidates, and with myself as well, because I think it's something to consider in that idea of, we could reject that out of hand, but maybe there's something in that we need to actually think about. And I'd just like to say thank you, Kim, and thank you, Susan, for asking me to moderate this panel. I've learned a great deal and it's been fascinating. And I'm very excited about the move for independence and micro parties, putting forward candidates. And I'm particularly excited by what feels like a tsunami of women standing. About bloody time, I say. Yeah. I'll hand over to Tony.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
We're good to go. Yes, look, that's been a fantastic hour, and it's one of the best hours I've spent, and far better than if you're watching Question Time in the Senate today. So I'd like to just again thank in particular Jane for the way she's hosted and moderated this. It's been really good. And it's given Susan and Kim a real good opportunity to outline beautifully what they stand for and their way forward. And I haven't had a chance to look through the chat or the Q&As that might be remaining, but looking forward to seeing those in the coming day or two. But I'll just do one little bit of a crossover. You've got time now, everybody, to now grab a cup of tea or something better, because at 8:30 is part 2 of The Big Deal, featuring Christian Van Vuren, and that's been put together by Craig Rucastle. And if you've seen the first episode last week, this second episode or part 2 gives you a whole lot more hope. So the last 15 or 20 minutes goes through some community grassroots activity that actually starts to show where some of the solution is. And I'm pretty proud to say that a fair bit of that comes from Indi. So I hope all those who haven't already seen it, get ready for that in 28 minutes time. So thank you very much for all attending.